So welcome everyone to Legal Tech Talks. My name is Frances Anderson and I'm the Managing Director of Netlaw Media. Today, I'm delighted to welcome a Deltas aligned panel, Lawyers and Law Firms the Next Generation, which will be moderated by David Fazakerley, one of the legal sector's leading CIOs and a great inclusion and diversity champion. Now, to give a bit of insight to people who are joining us in relation to Deltas, it means diversity and ethics in legal IT and security. It's here to promote and encourage inclusiveness and diversity in all aspects of information technology and security, whilst maintaining a standards of excellence, but with particular reference to the legal tech sector, and also encouraging our next generation of students into the legal profession and upskilling them if the positions as a lawyer are not there into the legal tech community. Now, Deltas was created by a group who are passionate about creating change within the legal IT profession. Now, our moderator and Delta's champion, David, everyone please call him Dave. You'll see the book behind his, the back of him. So just there, call him Dave. So sorry about that. Has been in the legal IT for the last 14 years. Previously as the head of IT service delivery, then IT strategy at Eversheds, and most recently a CIO of MW Solicitors, responsible for ICT, innovation and legal support operations. In 2009, he co-founded a cloud-based management service company called PAS and IaaS and SaaS to law firms, first as COO and then CEO. Before legal, he had 7 years working for Trinity Mirror newspapers, fulfilling many roles, but ended his time there as a group IT services manager. Now, before I hand over to Dave, who will introduce the panel today and outline the agenda, I'd like to go through some housekeeping with everyone. So this session's going to last about an hour. With questions being brought in throughout the session. Now, with the live Q&A part, if you would like to ask a question live to Nicky, to Camilla, to Dave directly, then please raise your hand, click on your name, you'll be able to ask the question. And then what we'll do is we'll bring you in nearer to the end where you can actually join in and ask them directly. However, please use the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom. If you type in your question, Dave will be monitoring that and we'll bring that in throughout the session, which we're about to start. Or there's the chat function as well, which you're able to use. So now, without further ado, Dave, it's over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Francis, and welcome everybody to this Netlaw Media Tech Talk. And it's a pleasure to co-host this with Francis and to facilitate and chair this today. It's my second go round. I'm very pleased to be asked back, actually. That's very nice. And so it gives me great pleasure now, before talking a little bit about the theme and what we're going to get into, to introduce to you two fabulous people. No money was exchanged in me saying these warm words about them. I genuinely think this. Let me first introduce you to Camilla. Camilla is an LLB law graduate from the University of Kent, and she's currently pursuing a career as a solicitor. In fact, we'll learn a little bit more about that journey as we get into the topics. She serves as the editor-in-chief and the content manager of The Student Lawyer, an online publication which is run by students aiming to make legal news and articles accessible to aspiring solicitors and barristers. She also, keeping herself very, very busy, co-founded the Student Lawyer podcast and interviews guests from the legal industry about hot topics in law, providing career advice and inspiration, hopefully, to listeners. On a more personal front, because I said to Camilla, what else do we know about you, Camilla? And she wants everyone to know that she's a vegan. No, she didn't quite put it across that strong, but she does like to slip that into every conversation. So I've done mention number one, Camilla. Let's see how you slipped veganism into some of your answers a little bit later on. But she's also an animal lover and is the proud owner of not one, not two, but 3 cats. And I was wondering, Camilla, are we going to see a guest starring role from the cats today, marching across, or are they isolated out of the room?
I've got them out, but you know, they're getting quite good with the opposable thumb, so you never know.
Good. they make a guest star appearance shortly. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Baroness Morgan, Nicky Morgan. Now, Nicky's a fairly high-profile figure, and you probably know her. You may or may not know that Nicky's actually a lawyer, and she read college at St. Hugh's College, Oxford, qualified as a solicitor in 1994, and was a corporate lawyer working for firms such as Theodore Gollard, Allen and Overy, and Travers Smith, to name but three. What you probably do know is that Nicky's been a Conservative MP for a number of years between 2010 and 2019. Was elected as the Member of Parliament for Loughborough and re-elected in 2015 and re-elected again in 2017, all with increased majorities, I might point out. Nicky stood down at the 2019 election, but was elevated as a life peer to the House of Lords. And relevant to the conversation today, she's had many high offices of state, including a number of key positions relevant to our talk today. But she's been Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, Secretary of State for Education, something we'll dive into a little bit later, Minister for Women and Equality is a key theme for part of our talk today, has been both Economic and Financial Treasury to the Secretary to the Treasury, and Chair of the Treasury, all-powerful Treasury Select Committee. So welcome, Nicky, good to see you with us. I think your microphone's just on.
Thank you.
Got you. And I also said to Nicky, so what have you been doing in lockdown to keep busy? And she said to me, well, I've been doing a number of personal bests. I do a lot of running, hitting a lot of records at the moment. And I thought to myself, well, that's very like me. I've done some personal bests. You can't see this, but off camera, I have a wonderful internal exercise bike. And I recently set the personal best for going the largest amount of consecutive days without getting on the bike. I would say to all our listeners that perhaps Nicky's example is the better personal best to follow rather than mine. And here's something I didn't know about Nicky. She's also a steam train enthusiast. I didn't know this. And actually set up the all-party group on Heritage Rail and has just become non-executive director of the Great Central Railway in Loughborough. So you've been hiding that fact, but not anymore, Nicky. But welcome. Right. Let's get into the topic. Now that we've all warmed up and got to know our speakers just a little bit, what are we going to be talking about today? Lawyers, law firms, very much all about the next generation. We're going to start quite general, and then we're going to become more specific as we go through the hour together. But we're going to be looking at work and home life and the hybrid models of that, and is it going to stick, is it going to change? Very much from the viewpoint of what it means for younger people, for students, for young solicitors, for trainee solicitors, and those very early in the profession, as well as what it might mean for the rest of us a little bit more established as well. Given our panel today, we're going to be looking at the social and economic changes that have gone on, that will continue to go on for some time. We'll look a little bit about the Chancellor's statement as well that's just been made, and hear a little bit about government policy and what we should be thinking or challenging there. And this is my challenge to all you at home, because we want lots of your questions today. So please, as Francis said, do be putting in the Q&As and the chat. Is remote working the great leveller? Does it actually help opportunity, equalise opportunity? Is it easier to make progress in a more fair and balanced way? Or have we actually inadvertently set gender equality backwards in some ways? We're going to be exploring those themes. We're going to be looking at recruitment, and as recruitment gets going, as it becomes more online and more virtual, we're going to be looking at the positive elements of those and perhaps some of the things to look out for or be careful of. As many of you are partners and business leaders on this call, and technology leaders, we're going to be looking at recruitment from the viewpoint of the choices that you make as well, and the things that you should be considering. We'll be looking at training and coaching and how to do that virtually. It's not the same. Could it be better? Is it going to be worse? Are there going to be problems for us to look at? and how tough is the job market from the viewpoint of people coming through now. And Camilla has done some research ahead of this session today, and we'll be bringing in Camilla very much to talk about some interesting information. And what some of those stats are saying is that the young people, young lawyers, student lawyers, what they're actually thinking about the market today and in the immediate future. And some of those figures are a little bit stark. So all of that we're going to get into. We've only got an hour, okay? Too much content, but I want lots of your questions, okay? So your contributions matter. So we'll probably get going for the first 10 minutes, and then I look forward to introducing your questions. So let's get, with that warm up, let's get cracking. And Nicky, I'm probably going to come to you to try and kick this off for us. But if we think about working from home, and it's been discussed in many, many panels and sessions that I've been in now, but we're in this situation now where we're beginning to move back to something. Some of us are going back to the office, many of us not full-time. It's a sort of new hybrid sort of setup. How sticky do you think home working as it is now is going to be? How far back to the old norm do you think we'll go? Actually, is that not going to be, is there going to be a new norm? Why don't you sort of start us off on that?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak this afternoon. And you're right, and I think this is one of the big, well, first of all, we should be aware of the fact that this is a debate about working from home, which only certain proportions of workers in this country are able to have. And actually, the whole thing about the crisis over the last few months and lockdown, I'm sitting on various committees and commissions and doing polling and everything else. And everybody's experience is different, and their views of what's happened is very much shaped by their own personal experience or perhaps family experience or their health experience, which shouldn't be a surprise to us. But I think in terms of running workplaces of the future and understanding, as David said, the nervousness that people might have about coming back into the office, it's going to require those of us who are bosses to put ourselves into other people's shoes and to understand where they are coming from. I think what's been totally dismantled is the notion that you can't make a very good productive contribution by working from home. It's shown up some challenges about things like, and I was broadband Secretary of State until February, and boy was I nervous in March when the whole country suddenly went online, that, you know, was it going to stand up? You know, by and large it has, but it has shown up that there are still parts of the country where the connectivity obviously needs to be better. But also the whole digital divide. Now, perhaps less so in professional services, although interestingly, I was doing some research today about university students, many of whom you would expect, particularly overseas students, who are paying pretty significant fees, but actually what they didn't have was the IT in order to suddenly be able to cope with working from home. And I suspect there are going to be some law firms that also found that particularly younger employees maybe didn't have the robust IT that was needed, you know, as we've seen with homeschooling. iPads are fine up to a point, but to use them day in, day out, week in, week out for months on end, you know, doesn't give you the robustness that you need. So what it seems to be is that hybrid working is here, and I strongly suspect that there will be people who will split their time between being at home and being in the office. I think there are big questions for professional services firms and others about the size of the office they're going to have, how they're going to arrange things, how people are going to feel secure coming in. And David, I think we're going to come on and talk about some of the gender implications and the implications for different age groups of all of this. But undoubtedly, we have shown that we can work from home. The last thing I'll just say is this: I think the crisis has also shown that we're all social animals. And whilst there was perhaps some enjoyment, I have to say I haven't found lockdown particularly easy. I mean, it's the first time that I've not been rushing up and down to London for decades. And I like being, you know, in different places and seeing people and going out and everything else. So I think we've realised that first few weeks that was perhaps quite nice, slower pace of life, enables us to do things. Actually, we now miss the company of others. And if you are a boss again, or somebody working in a team, trying to create a team spirit or a organisational culture is much harder if people are remote working forever. And that's why I think the hybrid working model is the one that we'll probably all end up adopting.
Well, there's a few, I think different people have different experiences, don't they, and different feelings. And I think that's what the challenge is for a lot of firms, is it's no longer just you're in the office or you have a home working or flexible working policy. There's now probably lots of models, different models of different types of work that people are maybe going to start sort of demanding based on their experiences. Camilla, I'm going to come to you with regards to, you know, starting with young people's perceptions of home work, how it has been, and maybe their views, especially given what Nicky has just alluded to with the social culture missing out and not being a part of. But just from a tech in the home and being a home, what is the young person's sort of experience of home working, perhaps compared to someone like me in their mid-40s or partners, other partners might be in their 50s and 60s and far more established in their home setups perhaps than younger people?
That's a great question. I think that, well, from the survey that I've done, you know, we've gone out to the student lawyers readers to get their perceptions on how they've been able to work from home and whether it's brought up any challenges or whether, you know, they found it easier. And actually the results show that 40% of the respondents actually find it more difficult to work from home for various reasons. I think only 17.5% said that they work better at home. So I think that's potentially because of maybe, you know, maybe, like you said, maybe they don't have their own home, maybe they don't have a room that they can call their study, perhaps they're sort of working in their bedroom or, you know, alongside siblings, and they just can't get that peace and quiet. And I think especially when you're talking about things like vacation schemes and interviews, having that, you know, it's not just working, it's having that opportunity to be able to, you know, lock themselves away in a quiet space to perform at their best in order to secure these jobs that they're going for. So yeah, I think working from home has definitely been a challenge for some of our readers.
The things, Camilla, that jumped into my mind is that people, like you said, could still be at home with their parents, especially if they're students or student lawyers at the very beginning of their careers. But even lawyers who have just qualified may be in flat shares, where, you know, they've all got their own bedroom, but they're in a share, you know, they've got shared kitchens and sort of living rooms and living with 3 or 4 other people, maybe for many early years, and therefore, you know, you go a bit stir crazy if you're stuck in your bedroom all the time, and it's not necessarily conducive or even healthy from a wellness point of view to be sort of cocooned all the time. And you know, I've got a point here about actually my mother's a lawyer. I won't give her age, she'll never forgive me for that, especially she might be on the call, but she is, you know, is coming towards the end of her career and actually has quite enjoyed working from home. Why? Because, you know, she has a nice big house, has a separate area to build a sort of study and to work, and has got into a routine where actually her productivity is very high, and she's a private client lawyer, so actually she's very busy and the workload is very high. But that flexibility of being at home, of being able to enjoy home life and family life is more important to her right now, and actually was a little anxious perhaps about going back into the office sort of full time. But Nicky, that also just strikes a thought in my head about, and let's just take here in London, for example, some people might be willing to go back to the office because they miss it a little bit, because they miss the camaraderie, and there's certain things that are better to do in an office, but they seem very reticent to take public transport, which is the thing that actually is them going, it's not so much being in the office, it's being on the tube or on buses. Do you want to just talk to that point? Because I've actually, for the first time this week, taken some tube travel there in the Mask, was very relieved that not many people were on the train. This is the central line through the afternoon of a working day. But it did make me think people haven't come back to public transport. The roads are busy though, so maybe you just want to talk to those points a little.
I think that's you know, what you've just talked about is where we're going to see longer term societal change, if I can put it like that. So you know, in London, many people don't own cars because it's just not cost effective to do so. By the time you've either struggled to get a parking space, or you've paid for parking, or you sat in a traffic jam, And now, of course, like in many other decisions, people are weighing up, well, the health concerns or versus the inconvenience. So perhaps expecting you're going to have a longer car journey, but at least you're in your own environment rather than sitting tubes. I mean, I haven't been in London since the middle of March, but what I hear is exactly as you said, David, the tubes are much quieter than you'd ever expect them to be. And so giving people confidence, whether that means, I mean, I think there is a view that perhaps that's going to mean more people cycling, for example, or walking to work. Well, that's feasible for some people, but it might not be for others. And I guess you will take more of an interest, perhaps, in one of the things about if people do go in is about staggered hours. And so often in the same way that you might have in the civil service, for example, where you have core hours, but people are perfectly entitled. When I worked in the Treasury, if ever I was there early in the morning, there are people who arrive from 7 o'clock in the morning and they leave obviously earlier in the day, or vice versa, arrive a bit later and leave later in the day because that suits, you know, the way they want to live their lives or caring responsibilities. Whether we're going to see more of that and people checking to see how busy a service is before they get on it. But I've just noticed in the chat, there's also a really interesting point, which I was going to raise about working from home, and particularly around those in flat share, or if your partner is a fellow lawyer or a fellow other professional, or anybody, I suppose, really, which is if you're working on, I used to do M&A deals, some of the stuff is price sensitive. And, you know, you always have to be really, really careful about not talking about these sorts of things. But if you're doing it all from home, and trying to keep that stuff confidential. And of course, what we've seen is some other professional services firms also falling foul of sort of trying to install software that monitors what their employees are doing, how long they spend at their computers, conversations they're having, and they found that that's very unacceptable to their employees, and they've had to deinstall those sorts of things. All these are, so I was just in a meeting for this, for many people who thought they had their work environment set up, you know, many bosses, partners in law firms, 25 years or 30-year career, and, you know, you're doing things the same. Suddenly, all the cards have been thrown up, and people having to have conversations like this that they probably never thought they were going to, apart from the odd flexible working request on an individual basis where they could say yes or they could say no.
Yes, and thanks to Martha O'Toole, it is, who's posed that question, really about, you know, working in very small environments and coping with it is one thing, but there is very serious elements around data security, client confidentiality, and engaging in conferences. So the reality of going back to work is there are some things that we have to go back to the office for to do properly and in the right way. Perhaps we should talk about office spaces just a little bit at this point, because many firms are considering downsizing. Others are considering just changing the internal fabric of their office environments to be very different, maybe to be more larger, safer client engagement areas, conference engagement areas, and less of we're all going to cram into these spaces just to come into work every day. And it struck me, though, that whereas some firms might be considering that downsizing, in order to actually encourage some social distancing, if you're going to have less people with more space, you might pretty much just need the space you've got, but to consider it, to reconfigure it. And then that has an impact on not actually, there's no cost saving imperative there if you're actually keeping the space. But I wonder how London is going to change that way. Camilla, do you feel that, just sort of wrapping up a little bit on that topic area before we move on, that younger people more than the more established people in the legal profession probably want to get back into the office? Do you think there's a balance there that says, or at least find a balance of more work time in office time than home time? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think people at the beginning of their careers probably, you know, want to probably socialise a little bit more with their colleagues, especially if they're on their training contracts, maybe, having a chat by the coffee machine or the water cooler about the stuff that they're working on. They might not have built up those professional relationships that people who are, maybe 10 years into their career might have already built those relationships. So then, moving back working remotely, you've already got those bonds, whereas people who are just starting out in their career don't really have that network to rely upon. So I think that we are definitely sort of feeling that it would be nice to get back into the office to just make connections and bonds with people. And in my survey it was seen that from a networking perspective, it's been difficult to network with legal professionals as well, because I mean, it's been great. You know, law firms and law schools have been putting on lots of networking events, but when you've got, you know, thousands of people applying for these things, I think the Bright Network had 10,000 attendees. You just can't really get that that sort of contact with the legal professionals.
Let's try and tie a few things, few threads together. First, I'm going to start. There's a question that's come in from Patrick Steam. Or Stein. I hope I pronounced that right, Patrick. Forgive me if I haven't. Will apps like Zoom or other electronic meeting programs like we're using today, Teams is another, there's others, replace or greatly reduce face-to-face client meetings and meetings with other professionals? And what I'll try and link that into is as well as client meetings, when it comes to the supervision of staff, which is a legal requirement, all lawyers have to be supervised by someone. But for younger lawyers, supervision is absolutely key to their learning journey and experience. Now, remote supervision or non-physical or non-in-presence sort of coaching is, to my mind, going to be far more difficult. Is a lack of supervision to younger staff going to lead to problems with trainees and the newly qualified? Because my take on it is that Zoom calls, you know, we're doing our best to look at one another here, and I've set up my camera right in the middle of the TV actually, so I can't see part of you, and it's just so that I can make eye contact with you and stick eye contact at the same time. It's a tricky thing, and I've had to learn how to do that so that I can still look at the body language of everyone and understand what's going on. But there's still a barrier and a limitation, and also we can't all have formalized get-together Zoom meetings, and that's no replacement for the constant coaching and presence of the exercise of young lawyers learning from the senior partners around them. Camilla, what's your thoughts on that, especially with regards to the constraints?
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, I mean, I spoke to a trainee who sort of said that at work, you know, you might be doing some work for a partner, and it's just easy to sort of go to the person next to you and just say, oh, you know, what do you think of that? Or the partner might tap you on the shoulder and go to a meeting room, and you might, you know, go through the feedback, and it's easy to see because you've got the paperwork in front of you. But if you're doing it over Zoom or just remotely in general, you don't. It's a bit more daunting to have to pick up the phone and take extra steps to make contact with people. You might feel that you're kind of bothering them, or that they're busy, or that your questions just, you know, silly questions, something like that. And I think now the kind of onus is on the trainee or the work experience student to actually, you know, make that effort to reach out and speak. And I think it's, for me personally, I learned very well through osmosis. So not being able to listen to other people's conversations, watch how partners or associates are interacting with clients, you know, you learn a lot that way, and I think that is eliminated with working from home.
And let's be honest, it can be intimidating for young lawyers in an office space to interrupt their partners anyway. How much more difficult is it to think, I'm going to pick up the phone every, you know, half an hour or whatever just to ask you something that's relatively basic. The human instinct sometimes is not to do that. It's bad enough when you're there person to person, but at least a good supervisor, a good partner can be aware of the body language of what's going on with the people around them. I suppose, and I want to put this question out to the viewers on this panel today. I'm interested to hear from other lawyers about this particular topic, so please put your comments in and we'll represent them to the group, about how you may be tackling this, or do you see it as a problem? Have you come up with some solutions yourself? What have you found to sort of get past the coaching and the supervision challenges? Very much it would be good to try and share that with the group. And whilst we wait for those to come in, let's look a little bit now at the gender perspective and gender equality, because the experiences for people working from home are different, like we've already said. Camilla, I'll come to you first, and then maybe Nicky on this. If we look at unable to leave in the home physically, if you've got very young children, and you not to discount young fathers who are doing their jobs as fathers as well, but it can have younger children can have an impact in the home than maybe teenagers that are a little bit more sort of self-sufficient. And so I think it's important to talk to that. Camilla, you made some comments here about media interviews and how women's opinions on media interviews are a little bit different, and we've got some issues here around, unfortunately, and we're seeing this, I suppose, as law firms, the increases in domestic violence and other things in home as a result of being in the home. Why don't you kick us off on those areas first, Camilla, and then Nicky, I'm going to come to you on whether we've set gender equality back at all with this. Camilla.
Yeah, so I think it is really difficult if you're working from home and you have children, because I just don't think it makes it any easier, because you're still going to have to find childcare, and then you just can't leave, the children and then be in the office and then mentally sort of be away from the home life. It becomes a merge of home and work. So I think it is something that women will struggle with, and especially if it's the case that the children are at home and you have to be in a meeting or a Zoom call, then perhaps women will just sort of be kind of worried that someone might start crying or you might get interrupted by children. So perhaps it could be the case that either women start to turn down meetings or media interviews, and then that affects the presence of women in the workplace, and then perhaps they could start getting overlooked for things. And regarding domestic violence, yeah, I mean, I was having a look at some statistics from Women's Aid, and it does seem that 2/3 of women have said that working from home has made things has made it harder for them to leave the abusers, and I just think that it's just definitely going to make things worse.
Thanks, Camilla. Nicky, obviously you had the Women and Equalities brief for some time, as well as your other positions. When it comes to recruitment and opportunity, there's a lot of information to say this is a great leveler, actually, and people's accessibility to roles is a much more of a level playing field. But perhaps men perform better in certain interviews than women, and this has actually leveled things out. Or perhaps actually that's not the case. Perhaps we've gone backwards. Why don't you educate me and perhaps some others on that?
Well, I think it's a very mixed picture. I am really concerned that overall women's role in, we're talking particularly about professional services here, but in the workplace is set back ultimately by this this move for more people working from home. And I'll tell you why. I mean, I think in terms of job interviews, there is research, as you say, to say that women actually perform very well online, that men will often rely on their physical presence and building up a physical rapport with the interview panel in a way that women often, some women do, and I don't want to generalise, but that's what recruitment consultants are saying. And interestingly also, these sorts of setups where you've got somebody, literally having to raise a virtual hand, actually helps because the person chairing will go round and see all of that, whereas often I think we've all done it, where somebody who again has somebody more senior, somebody with a bigger physical presence leaps in because their point is they think the one that the room wants to hear, and the person that's sort of struggling to get heard, this may help. But I think, as Camilla says, I hear reports that it is female employees who, after months of trying to juggle homeschooling, caring responsibilities, trying to work, are saying to bosses, either I need time out or I don't think I can do this much longer. And I think it's incumbent again on bosses to think really hard about this. I'm not sure we'll ever get away from the culture of presenteeism completely in professional services and financial services. And so my worry is that for very good reasons, people have now, as I said in my first answer, I think the case for being able to be productive and work out of the office has been absolutely made by this. And therefore people will think, well, actually, I'd like to do more of that. That's great. But then actually, if you're not there and other people are there, and particularly if you have hybrid working, then actually people sort of count themselves out of being remembered in the promotion rounds or being given interesting work because they're not there. And so I think my experience with women equalities is, if you want to really think about improving diversity in an organisation, and it's essential, then you have to absolutely think about it deliberately all the time. So even if you sit down in a meeting and you've got 50% of the room in 50% of the meeting in one room and 50% logging in from home, the person chairing the meeting has to think all the time, as you were saying, David, what's the body language of those I can see and those I can see online? Who wants to come in? Who hasn't spoken? All those sorts of things. So it's just a different way of working. I hope that we've got enough bosses and people in charge of these things, HR and everything else, that we are not going to put back gender equality, because we've got a long way to go in law, as we know.
Well, people are different and bosses are different. And your comment about presenteeism is one that I've had a little think about because I think the reality is, and maybe it's a little bit of human nature, is, and I'm thinking, isn't it Her Majesty the Queen who said, to be seen is to be believed? And those in the office with that real-time accessibility to people are naturally going to be more in the forefront of people's thoughts than people who are working very hard. Their productivity is excellent, they're doing great work, but they're doing it out of sight, and you see them in the Zoom meeting. And you're right, I think there is an emphasis on the bosses and the leaders to make sure in the Zoom meetings there's an integration. I'm more concerned when the Zoom meeting ends,
yes,
and then it's just the normal hubbub of work, and those who are seen. And I think that will drive, unless there's second waves coming around that forces all back into the direction. I don't think it'll ever go back to how it was, but I do think that will drive traffic back because of people's fear of loss, fear of losing out, fear of not being there.
You've also, the bosses, you can't rely on people deciding for themselves they need to be back in the office. I mean, you've got to ask people what it is they want to do. And in terms of career progression, others, if you decided to work from home 4 days a week, just take these things into account. Otherwise, as I say, it's very easy for people to count themselves out without realizing what they've done. Yes. And only 5 or 10 years later do they realize actually all their cohort who were in the office got the promotions or recognition or whatever, the interesting deals, and they didn't. And they were working extremely hard, but they just didn't, as you say, quite register with people making the decisions.
Yes, now, wonderfully, we have both chat and questions coming in. So I'm going to take a little pause and just try and bring up some of the points that people have made, and then we'll share that with the group, and then we'll try and talk about them. And actually, there's a few people having a chat with one another. That's wonderful. But let me just hold on there, people. Hold on. I love the enthusiasm, but let me just try and take in a couple of points first. Alison Devlin, responding to our point before about supervision, is basically saying, look, it takes a lot more effort. We need to encourage supervisors to take the initiative and schedule more time, more regular, probably at least daily catch-ups and one-to-ones, as well as more regular team meetings to keep the social interaction going, as well as the supervision. And that seems to have some agreement from various people. Alex Rocha, hello Alex, nice to see you. I know Alex said the lockdown has superimposed 2 formally distinct places of activity into one. A little bit of what we were talking about there, and I think that's interesting. What is the difference between the workplace and the home workplace? And actually, if it's just one, maybe that's not a good thing. I mean, I'm not too sure it's a great thing. My home is my home. It's my place of sanctuary. It's where I come to get away from work and to relax. And of course, the lines are blurred now. It gives me a great deal more flexibility, and I enjoy certain elements of it. But the demarcation is not clear anymore. It is getting confused, and I'm more concerned about people's well-being through the long term of this. There's lots of positives from removing the prior somewhat artificial distinction between personal and private life. Alex saying the same. Ali saying the same thing there. So let's move on. And Angel Samano says, do you think that even more important than the digital transformation from the legal industry is the cultural transformation that will allow it to better adopt the change in its activities? And you're from Mexico City. Welcome. It's wonderful to have you here for this international group. Work from home has brought more humanity to the workplace culture. That's interesting, and is a great leveler. Remote working is probably also better for introverts compared to physical meetings, and that's a very interesting point, which is probably why me as an extrovert finds it quite difficult sometimes, because I get my source of energy from others and being out in environments, and but of course introverts, you know, the home environment can probably really be helpful. Anything to say to the panelists on a few of those comments that have come from people now? Camilla, why don't we start with you and we'll go to Nicky. Some interesting points there from our colleagues.
I really liked Alison's point about supervisors sort of needing to take the initiative and schedule more regular catch-ups. I just have a question really about how law firms are going to, you know, if they do decide to adopt home working, how is this training structure going to look for trainee solicitors, and how are they going to ensure that these, you know, training programs are going to be sufficient and enable lawyers to, trainee solicitors to actually, you know, do their best when they actually qualify? And is it the case that trainees will be sort of out of sight, out of mind while they're sort of busy doing other things? I think it's just going to take a lot more effort for law firms to actually put that structure in.
I think that's right about the supervisors having to be, and we all know there are some great supervisors and there are some who are not so great, and actually then that's a role for HR or others to make sure that people are still staying in touch with their trainees or spending time with them and teaching them, which, as you say, Camilla, and I certainly learned by osmosis. You know, sitting there listening to people is in how they handle clients and colleagues is absolutely invaluable in terms of gaining legal skills, and as much for the skills that the way the conversations go that you would never want to repeat, as well as the conversations and instructions that go really, really well. And I just, the point about the remote working being better for introverts and being a great leveler, I mean, I just think we have to be really cautious about this. As I go back to what I started, it depends on your personal experience. So it's a bit like the reason you have many schools reintroduce school uniforms is because when they left it to families to buy their own clothes, it was very obvious immediately who could afford the cool labels and who couldn't. And then that often meant people felt quite vulnerable and uncomfortable. And, you know, it's all very well, we've all got nice backdrops wherever we're sitting, but as we started off saying, many people might not be in that environment. And even worse, if you're in a sort of really dangerous environment where actually work has been in a way, your refuge, getting out every day and having people that you can talk to. And then the other thing was about the introverts. Well, so a lot of the work I've done has been on mental health. And interesting, I do know people, I'm a director of a little mental health charity in my former constituency. People find Zoom, well, I think Zoom's particularly, because it's the free one, often quite difficult. Some people, it's the thing about looking at people's faces, particularly for certain people with certain conditions, processing people's faces up close, the expressions. It's much easier often in a physical setting. So again, I think we need to just be really careful. That goes back to bosses saying to people, how do you like working? What's working for you and what's not? And let's be honest, most law firms, certainly when I was working in law, weren't great about having those proactive conversations. It was very much, here's one model, it's worked for the last 50 years, carry on using it.
Just to kind of add to that, the point about introverts, I think it could get to the point where introverts might not make sort of make the effort to actually, you know, contact their supervisors or contact their colleagues, and then it could lead to the point where, as Dave was saying, if sort of bosses don't make that effort to make sure that everyone's sort of being heard, if you've got a meeting where, you know, half the people are remote and half of the people are in the office, then again people could sort of get overlooked, and like you were saying, Nicky, the bigger cases could end up going to people who are in the office, and then sort of the introverts at home might sort of end up just, being passed over for these things, and I think it could affect progression.
A point that one of our colleagues has made is that there's some evidence to say that actually extroverts are struggling more with mental health perhaps than the introverts, because the close down actually has an impact on them that perhaps affects them a little bit more. So there are swings and roundabouts, aren't there, the positives and negatives to this. We've got here, so Nicky's absolutely right. You'd like to hear that, Nicky, wouldn't you? Nicky's absolutely right. We work overtime looking for natural visual cues in Zoom, and there is a fatigue in it. Yeah. And also, it's interesting when someone says something contentious and you see the reactions of everyone simultaneously. On the one hand, that can be fun, but actually it can be a bit disconcerting depending on the circumstances and what's being said, where you're literally able to look at, sometimes you can't do that around a table, especially if there's people sat left or right of you, but on a Zoom, you've got the whole reaction in front of you. And that's not a normal thing in human, so we're learning new skills, aren't we? New social skills with one another. Now, as I knew would happen, we're 47 minutes in, only a few minutes left. We've got so much content to cover. What I'm going to do, I'm going to state out some of the questions so that it can be heard, and then we'll try and integrate that into some of the answers that we've absolutely got coming up. Some positive things, by the way, Camilla. Rest assured, Camilla, lots of thought is going into our trainees and how it will work going forward. That's from Alison Devlin. That's great to hear. And Martha, I hope it all goes well. I'm due to start a new trainee seat on Monday virtually. Who knows how the supervision will work? Well, Martha, come back and tell us, and I hope it all goes well. We've got a question here from Tin Montague. Do you think COVID will cause any significant changes to the partnership and staff structure for law firms? So, how big might the changes go? We might leave that rhetorical. I'll put that out there to people listening in to maybe make some comments on that as we go. It would be remiss of me not to ask a former government minister and Secretary of State some questions on government, and we've got some questions also from people maybe on some policy. So let's just try and pull some of that in now. Nicky, let me just skip forward a little bit because of the time. But when, so the Chancellor had some things to say. Last week, he's introduced some changes for stamp duty. He's introduced some schemes to try and encourage people back to work. There's been some criticism of that because it's a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to sort of funding, keeping people post-furlough, and it's not so targeted and specific. What do you think what the Chancellor had to say, and is the government getting it right about the future steps, about the next steps? What do you think are the big issues?
Well, I think we've had two key statements this month. The first was from obviously the Prime Minister, which is about particularly about infrastructure spending, which for those firms that operate in the infrastructure space, and I talked about broadband earlier on, that's obviously all important for all of us, for example. The next one is to say with the Chancellor, I mean, look, the real challenge now, obviously we saw a massive economic hit in, well, the end of March, but April and May in particular. Not to be surprised, we shut the economy down effectively, you're going to have a huge hit. And again, it's a sort of case of two halves. Those who have sat out the lockdown, securing their jobs, or perhaps on furlough, but knowing there'll definitely be a job for them to go back to. Actually, there's a number of people who have actually seen the savings, people paying off credit cards, putting money into savings accounts, has gone up. But clearly there are also people who are desperately worried or have lost jobs or know that when they come off furlough, they'll be made redundant. And so the statement last week was very much about trying to get the economy obviously moving and getting cash through the economy, recognising some sectors very hard hit, but also trying to begin to support employment, particularly in relation to the young unemployed, making sure they're not as far away from the labour market as they might otherwise be, but encouraging bosses and businesses to take back those employees who have been on furlough. But also we talked a little bit about cities earlier on, and the whole thing about working from home, going back to the office. We all know any city we work in, the people who run the sandwich bar, the people in the coffee shop, the people in the pub after work, the people who sell us if you still read a paper newspaper, they sell us the paper, the newspaper or whatever it might be, the person at the station where you buy, your card to somebody's anniversary on the way home, all of those people at the moment do not have much footfall. And I think the government is really, really concerned that all those businesses there's only so long they're going to be able to continue without cash going through their books. So it's all about that. And that's why I think there's a psychological need to get back to some sort of new normal, but also there's an economic need as well. Just so much uncertainty, though, about the health risks and obviously the health worries and second wave. So it's very difficult to plan ahead.
We've got a question from Alex Rocha, which came in earlier, which is more relevant to this point. Given that the UK will spend upwards of a few £100 billion on the crisis, what does the panel think government, business and communities can collectively do to recoup this in terms of efficiencies, productivity? But my point on that is the money drain's not finished. Everything's been spent and there's more to come for the reasons you've just been saying. There's going to be a reducing amount of people in employment, a reducing tax take, regardless of whether you put the taxes up or not. The people able to contribute to tax revenue is coming down. We've still got an element of aging population as well, and a slowdown of immigration and people who could perhaps take on jobs and grow economies. Is this not a perfect storm? How on earth are we going to pay all this off, Nicky?
Well, the answer is we're not going to pay it off quickly. And I think, I went into politics, into Parliament and into politics and ministerial life in early 2010s, and then it was very clear it was a very different crisis we'd had. It was very much about paying off the national debt, closing the deficit gap and everything else. Now I think we have to accept the public debt's going to be with us for some time, and the consequences. So the other thing, in terms of the consequences, there may be businesses listening in, or there'll be others. You'll be advising businesses who have taken on some of the government debt schemes, which are absolutely the right thing to do, get businesses through this crisis. But clearly there are going to be some businesses that will struggle to repay that debt, or for whom that's going to be have a real impact. So they're not then able to invest in employees and equipment and everything else. So I think we just have to accept that although we had no expectation, and at the election last year, there was no expectation of what we'd be dealing with in 2020, that what has happened is going to be with us for I think, for many years.
Is it more like the World War 50-year programme of repayments? Is that what we're talking about in terms of scale?
I think it probably is. And I think one of the big things, though, now for those of us working in finance, is how, as I say, those businesses that did take out the loans quite rightly, how you help them to reschedule that debt or take on other investment so that you don't have that bit of the economy falling over as well.
Let's bring this back to the topic of this overall theme, which is the next generation. But carrying on with what you've just been saying, Nicky, I'm going to put this to Camilla. Haven't we screwed things up for the next generation, not just of lawyers, but actually of many young people coming through now, that they've got decades of maybe higher taxation and debt and struggling services ahead of them. They have more competition ahead of them. Camilla, you've got some personal experiences for yourself right now, and what you know from some of the polling you've done of younger students and colleagues who are trying to get jobs, finding it more competitive and more difficult than ever. Do you want to just talk to those points for us, Camilla?
So from my own personal experience, I know how competitive law is as a profession, and that's something that you kind of go in with your eyes wide open. But now with the pandemic, we're just sort of feeling that this is going to be the most competitive round, perhaps since the last financial crash, and it's probably going to be a lot worse than that. So my personal experience is that I've had a number of vacation scheme interviews cancelled, and I think the general feeling is that, well, looking at the results, everyone's sort of feeling the same way. 65% of respondents are feeling not confident about the upcoming cycle. So just over 42% have had placements that they've secured cancelled, and I think 72%, over 70% have said that they've applied, or firms that they've applied to or wanted to apply to this year, they've the firms just aren't recruiting. So it could be the case that we have a sort of, like a lost generation where people just aren't being, fed into the system at this point, and it's going to take a while for things to get back to normal.
I think there's something for the lawyers representing firms on this session today, is for something for them to think about, because I looked through your surveys there, and I'm just going to pull out a few stats like you've just done, but I think it's quite telling that how are you feeling about the up and coming recruitment cycles for training, contracts and pupiliges in terms of the opportunities that are available? 65% said they're not confident in the immediate future. To counter that, and this is still quite positive, at this moment, according to your survey, are you considering a career outside of the legal profession? Well, more than 90% of them at this point say no. But I wonder how long that will remain the case if there are cancelled contracts, a lack of availability of pupilages, and people who can't get training contracts and opportunities. If that continues, I wonder how long that will continue, and that's surely not good for the legal industry, Camilla.
No, definitely. I was really kind of surprised to see that, but not surprised at the same time, because, we're all being resilient and trying to go for, keep going, even though we know it's going to be hard. But yeah, I don't know how long that's going to last. I know from some of the feedback that I got on the survey, people are sort of saying that they're looking at courses that kind of relate to law, like just trying to upskill themselves by taking coding courses and other courses that they think will try to make themselves stand out. So perhaps there could be a way to create some more jobs around legal tech or something like that, because it seems to be, well,
as an example, Camilla, of what's going on right now, according to your survey, and the question was, have you had a work experience placement or vacation scheme cancelled or postponed because of COVID or since COVID? 42% said they've had their placements cancelled, and a further 31, nearly 32% said they've had their placements postponed. Only 26% are still going ahead, but online. Well, they're startling figures, and something I think for law firms to think carefully of. Of course, they're doing things on the law firms have to do things based on their reality today and what they can afford going forward. But I wonder if we're sleepwalking into a problem of a lost generation of lawyers, which was, 5-10 years down the line from now, we'll really have a problem in the sense that we've got gaps, and that won't be good for anybody in the country who relies on their legal profession and their lawyers, as well as a lost generation on that. What do you think to that, Nicky? And then I've got a question from Jazz I'll bring in.
I think that is a real danger. So when I qualified, when I left law school, it was 1993, so it was the sort of early 90s recession. And I mean, the good news is that law firms do, by and large, have to take on a set of trainees. Every year. They might do it every 6 months. Things might get deferred, but they still need that new set of people coming through. But you're right to say that undoubtedly the numbers, they do get trimmed back. And there will sometimes be a couple of years, and you'll see it go all the way through the profession, or all the way through their careers, where there are just fewer lawyers because that was the year when the economy was in a particularly poor state. It's sort of good news in the end for the lawyers, because I suppose they become highly sought after, but it's very painful for those. And I think, as Camilla says, the reason that people still want to be in law, doing a law degree, going to law school, and everything else, it requires enormous commitment, and it's a dream for many people, and they don't want to give it up, quite rightly.
And to finish our sort of session, I can't believe the hour has gone already. There was more to talk about, but here we go. From Jazz Bazzi, what one lesson do you take from what has happened during this pandemic into what happens if any future such event would happen again? So what can we learn, and what should we do differently? And will it come again, do you think?
No crisis ever repeats itself. And, even if we have a second wave, it won't have that shock, I think, that obviously we saw in March in this country and elsewhere. I suppose the point is, as somebody said, we've all been saying we can't change the way we get to work, we can't do things more, environmentally friendly. Actually, when you have to make change, you absolutely can do it. And I think the lesson is to be as agile, to be ready to be as agile as possible, and to prepare, but you just never quite know what you're preparing for. So things like risk registers, having them up to date and really thinking through what you might have to do if the unthinkable happens are
And Camilla,
essential.
if this all happens again, will there be despair amongst the young and future sort of lawyers, or are they more hardened now? Are they more ready to roll with the punches?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think that the feeling amongst the people that I've been speaking to is that they are they still want to pursue a career in law, and they're going to kind of do whatever it takes to get there. So I think it's just maybe thinking outside the box, doing things maybe a little bit differently. We've got the SQE that's coming up, that's going to shake up things a lot. So it's maybe just not having that tunnel vision, thinking, oh, this is how I'm going to get to my goal, A, B, C. Actually just exploring routes a little bit more. I think that's what will happen if something similar happens. But I think it probably will happen with this pandemic as well.
Well, thank you both very much for your contributions. I'd like to thank everybody at home, at work home, or the office, or wherever you be, for your contributions today. We got through a number of your comments, not all of them, I apologise, but we kept to the thrust of the discussion. And so at this point, I'd like to thank you all for your contributions. I hope you took something from it. I think the messages here are for people in law firms and leadership in law firms to think carefully about their trainees and their places, and if they're coming to have to make necessary sometimes cuts, to be as generous as you can and to think about the impacts that it's having on the young lawyers coming through now, and perhaps what it might mean for you in a few years if you do that. I think we've covered some of that today. So Francis, I think we've run out of time.
No, thank you, Dave, Nicky, and Camilla. I think this is such a highly energized topic, one which is affecting thousands of people now. I think you have a look even at the younger students, part of who we support, you're also through Deltas, the ones behind you, Camilla, coming through, looking at this going, what does this mean for us? I think this is where, from my perspective, upskilling, is going to be one of the things, isn't it, Dave? We look at going into sort of tech, going into how can you take lawyers, use that skill, now let's cross-train them. There is so much possibility, but I just want to thank everybody who's joined us today, because, again, that leads into a whole other topic as well. So thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone who's joined us for Illegal Tech Talks. And this will be live, so you'll be able to look back on it, and we will have the video, which we will share with everybody who's joined us, but more importantly, put it live as well. So thank you all, and we look forward to you joining us again.